In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a garter ridge tab cast-on for a top-down shawl. Your pattern will usually tell you how many stitches to start with, how many stitches to cast on. It can be 2, 3, 4, or any number of stitches depending on how the designer has designed the shawl. In this case, for this tutorial, I'm going to cast on 3 stitches. And I'm going to start with that. Now, your pattern will usually tell you how many rows to knit once you have your 3 stitches. And I'm going to go ahead and knit 6 rows. So I have knit my 6 rows. Now at this point your pattern might say something like, do not turn your work. And what this means is usually when you're knitting a row and you're working across your stitches, you turn your work and you start going the other direction and you work across this way. But we're not going to do that. We're going to stay going in the same direction, so you want to keep your working yarn on the left hand side of your work. And your pattern may say something like, turn your work 90 degrees and pick up stitches along the garter ridges. These are the garter ridges right here. We have 3 in this example, and that's where we are going to pick up our stitches. We are going to pick up 1 stitch at the end of each one of these garter ridges. And you're just going to find a space at the end of the row, at the end of the garter ridge, to insert your needle and pick up and knit a stitch, just like that. And the same thing for the next garter ridge. You just want to make sure that you're not splitting the yarn, splitting any of the fibers as you do this. And that's 2, and we're going to do 1 more right here, and that's 3. And I can tell you that this technique is pretty forgiving, and knitting itself is pretty forgiving. So if you don't get your needle in exactly the right spot, I don't think you're going to notice it all that much, as long as you're working along that one edge. Now at this point, your pattern might say something like, turn your work 90 degrees and pick up stitches along the cast-on row. So we're going to do that now. Just like with picking up the stitches at the end of the garter ridge, we're going to pick up stitches on the cast-on row. Now, sometimes a pattern will call for a provisional cast-on to make this process a little easier. However, I have found that you don't really notice this at the top of your shawl too much, so even when a pattern calls for a provisional cast-on, I usually don't do it. I usually just go ahead and pick up stitches. So now we're going to pick up stitches along this edge, and we just want to make sure that we pick up the number of stitches called for in the pattern. Just find the spots that feel right, evenly divided along your edge, and pick up your stitches. Now this last stitch is usually a little troublesome for me, so I'm going to use my needle and help it over the other needle a little bit. So there you have it. I have finished my garter ridge. I have 9 stitches on my needle in which to start my shawl. But now you know how to pick up and knit stitches along the garter ridges to create a garter tab for a top-down shawl. Thanks for watching. Bye.